Welcome to the Grief Pod with Venetia Quick. This is a weekly podcast which looks at every aspect of something which has or will at some point affect us all. And that is grief. Whether you've lost a loved one or about to lose someone you know, or perhaps you're simply trying to help someone navigate their grief and don't know where to start or what to say, then perhaps this is the podcast for you. Each week I'll be bringing you different stories and experiences of loss, love, hope and at times humour. The Cornucopia Story, a tale of love, loss, hope and healing, has been written by Deirdre O'Mara McCafferty, who co-founded the renowned Cornucopia restaurant 40 years ago with her late husband Neil. Now, after a 5-month battle with pancreatic cancer, Neil lost his life in 1993 and he was just 40 years old. Deirdre joins me on this week's episode of the Grief Pod. You're very good to come in. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And firstly, 40 years of Cornucopia, that is just, I mean, it's a Dublin institution and I think such a tremendous achievement considering such tremendous loss that you have had.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Well, it was a great celebration to reach 40 years. As I was just saying to you, Venetia, life is joy and sorrow. You know, as I think Cathal Gabrain says, when one is sleeping in your bed, the other is sitting at your table. So there are always two parallel lines in your life, joy and sorrow. And it certainly is a great joy that I am now celebrating fully the fact that Cornucopia on Wicklow Street is 40 years old. Yeah, that is an achievement.
I mean, there's a lot of people going, what is this? It's the secret to the success.
I suppose desperation. No other option. Keep going. I mean, Neil and I came back into a recession from our 9 years in the US, and really we were in our early 30s. So there wasn't really any other job. So we wanted to open up a whole food shop anyway, or do something in holistic health, because we had sort of converted to holistic health as a philosophy of life prior to that, while in Boston. Well, there was always a movement, but it was definitely a subculture. Anyway, long story short, we got this premises on Wicklow Street and we were quite entrepreneurial at the time. And even we were together in it for 7 years. And we couldn't have created it as singletons. It was the combination of the two of us allowed us to create Cornucopia, both Neil and I, both bringing our strengths to it. And when he passed, so suddenly, it was actually 3 months of, because pancreatic cancer can be very rapid, 3 months, he got diagnosed mid-June and he was passed at the end of September in 93. When he was gone, really, that was I could have retired, I suppose, in poverty on the widow's pension, and I certainly did consider it. And also Neil, when he first got ill, tried very hard to get somebody else to take over the running of the restaurant, because he was concerned that it would be too much for me to bring up 2 small children and run the restaurant. And I remember he approached another restaurateur to ask, would I be given a monthly salary and this other person take it over? And that person said no, he couldn't take advantage of a situation like this. Wow. But however, I kept on with the restaurant because so many reasons, but mostly passion. And I really believed in, holistic health became my thing when I was in America. And I really believed in the power of whole foods and health foods from so many different angles. So there's been a lot of passion has kept it going over 40 years. And I think it was a good location too. We were lucky.
True. Yeah, very. But also it was born out of love, as your and Neil's story is a love story.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
It's set against very difficult times and a difficult background and very, I suppose, contrasting backgrounds.
Yes, it was very much. So in writing the memoir, I was thinking it would be interesting historically for people because we met in 1973. I was a student in Trinity College and being very alternative at the time, involved in feminism and helping with the gay rights movement and quite socialist in my I had gone there to do social work. Neil, meanwhile, was living up in Derry in the north and from Cregan Estate. His parents were wonderful people, not anyway Republican. They just tried to keep their head down and not get involved. So Neil did not come from a Republican family. However, he dropped out of school at 15, and I guess he got swept up in the civil rights movements and all that came of that, and was actually, so that's a grief I want to talk about. If we're talking about grief, actually was right there on Bloody Sunday, and a paratrooper pointed the machine gun at him, but Neil stared back at him. He always told me this, and he swiveled and shot somebody else in the back. And I don't think Neil ever quite recovered from that. And that day his friend James Ray was killed. So
survivor's guilt, you know.
So he got caught up in a wave of reaction that swept through Derry at the time, and took a probably, you could say from historically, a misstep, but an understandable step to get involved. And then when I met him in Dublin, it was a very short time later, a lot of people enrolled in the IRA at that time in reaction. And you can imagine a teenage boy feeling they have to defend their patch. IRA stood for I ran away. Those were very early days. This is what he told me, but he did not like it when he got in there and saw, unfortunately, what his father had said to him, that, you know, various things he didn't like. And so he left very soon afterwards. Nobody ever pursued him, intimidated him, except the British establishment, because and down here he came to Dublin, and the special branch did know of his whereabouts. So we left and went to America after the Dublin and Monaghan bombing, because he got very scared at that time, and I had relatives in America. So I was a student. We met sort of randomly at a party that somebody dragged me to. I had no interest in the North, knew very little about it, found it all a bit intimidating, to be honest. It's a bit like many uncomfortable truths. Climate change today, we don't want to know about it. Yeah. Palestine, we don't really want to know about it unless we have to. You know, the odd person takes an interest and adopts it as a cause. But certainly me, I was like, I'd much rather think of conflicts further abroad than in my own country. So anyway, long story short, I do think that was a grief that he could never go back to Derry. And he lost Derry and the North at that time. And, you know, maybe if he had lived longer, he would have experienced the peace process. He would have experienced the ability to go home again, to see the most wonderful peace process that we have.
And that must be hard for you as well, because, you know, the whole idea that he couldn't go home, and then the peace process happened, and then it would have meant he could have gone home.
Well, when he died in 1993, I used, you know, on his gravestone I put peace doves, and you know, he had become a vegetarian. He had really changed his philosophy on life. He still, of course, you know, wanted justice for people, you know, not peace at any price. They say he wanted justice. However, I used to try and imagine, because I had quite a spiritual interpretation of Neil's death, quite a faith that came back to me, even though I used to be an atheist. And I used to imagine that he was working behind the scenes to create peace. That was what I consoled. One of the ways in which I consoled myself is that he had been called away to some heavenly realm to work for peace in Ireland. And I'm so proud of the peace process. I know it's not perfect, but when I see Israel and Palestine today, you know, or other places of conflict, I hope for that. So I think that was the first grief that was in my life, was Neil's grief over Bloody Sunday and what had happened in the North, and then his parents' grief at his decisions. You know, so that was the first grief that I encountered.
And then, so you had this quite an incredible and before its time existence really in the States.
Well, we did. We met a Vietnam veteran, you know, which is historically interesting too, called John Clifford, who was back in Ireland trying to find his roots. And he heard about this couple that wanted to go to the States, and he met us, and he was a larger than life character and had an incredible number of connections in Boston. I didn't have connections to Boston. I had connections to New York because my mother's siblings had all emigrated there. But he brought us to Boston and basically got us set up with jobs and college. Eventually, there was a few difficulties along the way, because he said that he would be able to get us visas, and he got us solicitors, and we got backers, and we did all the right things. But unfortunately, we were refused our student visas.
Okay.
We should have, we had J1 visas as students going over there, but we were looking for F1 and F2 visas, as student and spouse of a student. So then we said, well, we can't go back to Ireland, so we just have to join the ranks of the many undocumented migrants. They weren't called that then. They were called illegal immigrants, illegal aliens. Yes, always felt like, should I have a green face?
Yeah.
Being an illegal alien. So we could have gotten citizenship because there was a huge amnesty when we were there. Around the time we decided to come home, we could have become US citizens, and I think Neil would have been quite happy to do that.
You wanted to come home.
But if I wanted to come home to Mammy and Daddy. Girls like to be near their mammies when they're happy. And I wanted babies, and I wanted them to have the upbringing. I never settled in the US. I realised that I needed the Irish soil, Irish plants, Irish rain, the smell of Ireland, the clouds. I always felt like an uprooted plant in a different soil. I learned so much, and I grew so much there, and I became somewhat American in my positivity and all of that. I had a hugely positive influence on me, but I wanted to come home to dear old Ireland.
You came back, and obviously then Cornucopia started. Tell me a little bit then about Neil and his diagnosis, because
that happened. So we came back in 1984 and we set up, we had various ideas about what kind of businesses we would get involved with, and we knew some other people that wanted to open up holistic health centres, that would be like yoga centres, healthy holidays. We explored lots of different options with lots of different wonderful people, but then Neil was very practical, and he just thought we should paddle our own canoe and so do something very practical and grounded. I was sort of the more visionary person with big ideas. I wanted a completely enormous holistic health centre up a mountain by the sea with all kinds of strings and bows. But anyway, we set up a health food shop, which was very practical, in a site on Wicklow Street, and we were very lucky to get it. And Neil found it, and he sort of single-handedly, with some friends, converted it. He was very skilled into a health food shop. So to make the long story short, we ran that for 7 years, and on the 7th year, Neil said we need to turn it all into restaurant. He was always the leader in some kind of ways in the practical, whereas I would just keep going with the impractical if it was the better vision. However,
but that's sort of how businesses work, and that's, you're the ideas person.
I was the ideas
money
person, and he was the money person, exactly. So we had just converted it into all restaurant. And we moved our health food shop part. We had retail and cafe. So we turned it into all restaurant in early 1993. We had just converted it. And in June that year, Neil got a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. And he was gone very quickly. It seemed like overnight. So yours truly was left with a whole new relationship with Neil. I want to say, because I was thinking today, I'm 70 now. I was, we'll say, 20 when I met him. Then I had 20 years with him. That's 40. Yeah. And then he's gone 33 years. Yeah. So, in fact, I was with him, but there's a relationship with the person who dies, even with your parent, with your child. I think you still continue a relationship in your own head.
Of course, because they're still there, and especially if you've kids, you see them in your kids, or in your case as well, your grandkids, I'm sure.
Yeah, kids and grandchildren and nieces and nephews and all of his family, his sisters. I look at my daughter and I see him for sure.
But you still sometimes, I think, find you turn round, maybe it's just me, maybe I'm just mad, but you sort of feel like you turn around to talk to them sometimes, or ask their advice, or if there's things going wrong at home.
Yes.
You're just like, what do I do, or where are you?
Yes, I was reading in preparation for coming here today. I have this lovely book called All in the End is Harvest, and I was reading a poem called Surprised by Joy. Wordsworth, and so you think you're going to never feel joy again when somebody dies, but one day you just feel joyous. And it was his sister, and he quickly turned to share it with her and realised she was gone, and there was the shock all over again. So you're always in this relationship where you're speaking to the person who's gone, particularly if you're used to speaking to them every day.
Exactly.
Yes. So he died, very quickly, and that was certainly a long. I think I'm probably still in shock.
Yeah,
I think there's a shock.
There's a trauma, because especially with a short space of time like that, like 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. It's so sudden. Like you haven't even processed the fact
nothing has
the person
prepared
is
you
ill,
for that,
and then they're gone.
Yes, nothing. It wasn't a car accident. So I was looking at the statistics of the number of people that die in Irish roads every year. It's between 150 and 200, or 140, 130. And I was thinking that's that many families every year that have to go through this bereavement and shock and grief. And I was thinking, could we not be prepared for this, that this might happen? Or how would you even put that into a school curriculum, maybe in what form of education? Because it happens to so many people, and how do you learn the resilience, or maybe, but there's a taboo about talking about it, so people aren't always comfortable.
Yeah, I think that's getting a little better. The last few years, there's a lot more articles, there's a lot more written about grief and different types of grief. But I think, a lot of conversations that certainly we've had on this podcast is people do find it difficult to know what to say and to know what to do. But you found some of your friends
I just
did it in different ways.
May I just say that I experienced terrible grief also from being an emigrant. Yeah. I just want to mention that's another type of grief, which I've been very sympathetic, and I mention a lot in my book, The Cornucopia Story, that, I was an emigrant, so I have great empathy for migrants, how hard it is to leave your own land and come someplace new. And there was times when, I remember one time particularly, we went to Philadelphia, and there were millions of people there, and I didn't know any of them. And it really blew my mind that I could be in a place with millions of people, coming from small Ireland. So I just was so glad to scuttle home.
Yeah.
In a way, after 9 years.
It's to leave everything that you know behind because you have to.
It's very tough.
Very difficult.
It's a huge grief for people, and a huge loss of your country, your land, what the sunset looks like, what it smells like. It's very visceral. So anyway, back to Neil. Yeah. Yes, well, that was definitely, obviously, the biggest grief and that I've ever experienced and ever will. Well, you can never guarantee. We won't even go there. But what would be the biggest grief? Who knows? But there's all kinds of griefs. Yeah. And, So.
Yeah, I suppose like that part of your book is particularly, it's very moving. Like the way it's written and the way you talk about, asking him what he'd like his last words to be. And maybe like...
Yeah, so I did pluck up courage to do that. I was very aware of the sacredness of his life. I mean, we had been very atheistic, and we sort of, once I became vegetarian and got into holistic health, I had a sort of a reconnection with a sort of the idea of a divine. But Neil remained religiously atheistic up until the end, and then he did sort of have a deathbed conversion, I will say. He did find some comfort. I read to him. I remember one day I was kind of desperate, and I picked up, somebody had given us a Bible in the States, and I picked up and read to him, "The Lord is my shepherd." How do you comfort somebody who's been given a death sentence? He was told that there was nothing they could do for him. Go home. Do you have a will? Like it was quite surreal. And I know there's one opera, Tosca, where the guy is waiting to be executed in the morning, and he sings this incredible song about his life ending. I mean, people do have to face that you're going to be executed. It was a bit like being told that you were going to be executed. And when I first wrote the book, it was a letter really to my daughters, who were 5 and 6 when he passed, and I wanted them to know about who this amazing man was that was their father, and what an amazing life he had lived. And so I wrote it all down for them. And I sort of finished at the deathbed and said, well, we did survive, but that's another story. And the first editor to read it said, you can't end there. You've got to say, what did you do afterwards? And I was like, oh, I don't know that I want to go back there, because it was well buried at this point. But she told me about this movie called One Day that my friend and editor Eleanor, you have to watch this movie because it says what happened to him after his, So I did then delve deep into it, and it was cathartic to do it, and I didn't spare the reader, but I've got a lot of good editorial help to make it a smooth read. I had written some of it a little bit before in a cookbook that Cornucopia has out called the Cornucopia at Home, and the people did tell me it was very moving. And I was kind of belittling my bereavement, but thinking, but look at all the people that die in war. Look at all the people, I think that's one coping mechanism we do. We always think, who has it worse than us?
No, absolutely. And you do sort of, I think sometimes there's that little bit of guilt you feel because you sort of go, well, look, other people have lost their kids or multiple kids, or, people have it worse off.
The famine. Look at the famine you bring.
There is that sense of, look,
it's only me.
I don't have the pity party.
Yes.
Your 2 daughters were 6 and 5.
Yes.
And this is when you wrote the letter. Which as you just said, it was so they'd know their dad and what have you. What though really triggered it? What did you want to say in that initial letter?
I had studied history in college in the US. I did a master's in history, and I was very aware of that sort of historical thing. This is really interesting. And I was aware, I also had all these letters. So my mother had written to me religiously, small wording on airmail letters, every detail that was happening at home, the whole 9 years I was away, and I kept all her letters. And I had written volumes to her, not so very often. There were big complaints from Mommy and Daddy, you never write to us. And then I would make up for it by writing like 30-page letters, which she kept. So I had all those letters. So I was aware that I had this primary source, as they call them, and oral histories and all this. So I thought, I have to document this for the girls because they have lost their daddy. Their daddy, it was enormous. It was like losing God or something, It was just, I couldn't get over the enormity of their loss as well as my loss, but particularly their loss. And I thought, I have to write it down. So I took myself off about a month after he died to a place used to be called the Chrysalis Centre in Wicklow, with a beautiful woman called Anne-Marie Dunn ran it, who has since passed away. And I just went to her library and I wrote what happened every year because I thought I'll never remember. And then I put that letter away for years and really picked it up, about 10 years ago. And started to think, okay, I'm going to write this. And it ended up being 140,000 words. The book is 70,000 words. And I gave it to my eldest daughter, Roisin, and she loved it. She loved it and said, I'm so glad I have the real story. But then I got an editor to cut it in half. And or he ended up cutting it in half. Richard Bradbury from editorial.ie. He was very professional, and he told me. And then there were various other editors, including David from Liffey Press, who really was a wonderful. So I needed a lot of editorial help. But the long version, I think Roisin and Darina are glad that they have.
Yeah, because they're so. I mean, my younger 2 were 5 and 7.
Very similar.
It's similar age, and I still remember the evening I had to tell them that, Daddy wasn't coming home.
Okay.
And I suppose like Neil, it was such a quick time. There wasn't really any discussion, and they were too young. Were the girls aware how?
What happened was my sister-in-law came from the US to help
because
me
they
mind
spent
them.
a little time
Yeah,
there.
because we knew them very well from our time. My wonderful sister-in-law, Neil's sister Irene, came with her two smallies for the summer. Neil was diagnosed in June, so she stayed, June, July, August. Then she brought Roisin and Darina back home with her because we were trying, when we were told there was no help in the hospital, we tried an alternative health therapy called the Gerson therapy, and we tried the Hippocrates Health Centre therapy too, because we knew about that since we had lived there, which was juices and B12 injections, and it did give Neil some extra time, I do believe, and gave him, but it was quite involved. So anyway, I didn't tell them before they left, but Roisin later told me, that she peed the bed when she was in America. And
So
I
they knew there
know
was a
she was
second
stressed.
sense.
And the little pictures of them, oh my God, it breaks my heart even to see it on their passports, because I had to get them passports quickly. They look so, I don't know, they look like children in a war zone to me. The black, just that sort of stark look. So I think they obviously picked up on the terrible stress. But when they came home, I'll never forget the day Irene and I decided we had to tell them, and they were outside playing on the street. We lived in a cul-de-sac, and they had great little pals. And I brought them in and sat them down. I think it was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. And what really broke my heart, and I read about it today in another book, is Darina said to me, well, my friends still play with me. And, I read about a little girl today in a book whose father died, and the other kids wouldn't play with her because there's something scary. And I think little Darina at 5 sort of knew that. Now, and I know that Roisin later, when she went to school, was bullied because the kids didn't like it. The fact that, it is hard for them to be different. That is the stark reality. So Darina said, well, my friends will play with me, and I thought my heart would break into 1,000 pieces. And then we went up to the hospital, and Neil was close to death. And Roisin, I got her she had been saving up a joke for him. So I got her to massage his arm. Darina was a bit scared. He looked quite scary at this point. I mean, it was very harrowing. Let's not pretend it's not a Hollywood thing, somebody dying. No, it's portrayed in Hollywood, and it's always, I think, makes it easier for the listener. It's not. It's a difficult
no, it's
thing.
awful. There's a shudder, and there's a
difficult thing to watch somebody dying. So Roisin did go in and massaged his arm, and saved up a joke she had for him. I remember he laughed. He loved it, which was, what do you get when you cross an elephant and a kangaroo? And it was holes all over Australia, and he laughed at her little joke, and he was just so delighted, but he was so thin at this point, It was just very poignant. And for his sisters and his mother, it was very difficult. I realise now, I was so involved in my own grief. It's only looking back now, I realise how tough it was for so many people to lose him. His siblings and his mother. His father had already passed away. So his mum, she was an amazing woman herself, a wee Derry woman. She was like a battle. She was so strong. And it actually made me strong because she expected me to be strong. She expected me to take care of her grandchildren. The McCafferty clan, I was only an interloper, into the McCafferty clan, minding their Roisin and Darina. So I was Deirdre O'Mara, sort of married into the clan.
Yeah, the grandkids always belonged to the...
They belonged. They were, I better take care of them, and I better put out the bins and pull myself together. So I had this sort of... And I think Neil had toughened me up a little bit too, because he had that strong Ulster set, to himself. He was. They had been through so much grief. His mother and father had been burnt out, his grandparents had been burnt out, and his mother was a child, in Belfast. So they had been through a lot. And my parents had been through a lot too, so they were tough. And you were kind of expected to be tough.
Yeah, because it is hard to, you sort of put your own grief on to one side when you've small kids, because you're navigating theirs, and, especially one day one might have difficult, be going through the throes of grief. The next day it might be one of the other ones, And it's, I mean, people sort of tend to forget that kids grieve like adults. Like, it can come out of nowhere. There can be a trigger. There can be anything. Another kid could say something, or it could be something in school that's,
well, the funeral was
Father's Day, or
the funeral was a big experience for them, I remember. And afterwards they used to play funerals on with their friends. Wow. And Darina used to make coffins out of shoe boxes and get
the dollies
and metal crosses and line them up. You see, they were play. Everything was done through play, being small children. And I did bring them to bereavement counselling, which was fantastic, in Temple Street Hospital. A psychiatrist. I went to a psychiatrist and I heard Neil in my head say, thank God you've done something sensible. Because I remember I had to pay, it was 94, you have to remember, 93. Yeah. I paid £100 to go to this psychiatrist. I thought it was an absolute fortune. But he was so good, he referred us to bereavement counselling, and they used to draw. They would colour in where in their body was angry, where in their body was sad, and they were able to process. And later, one of the other girls went to further counselling in Bernardo's, and they were fantastic, and it was really good. And then I went to bereavement counselling after a couple of years, and I wouldn't have come through it without it. So I highly recommend it. The other thing that really helped me, and I was thinking this before I came in, it helped me, doesn't necessarily help everybody, is poetry, literature and music. Like, I really found there was a particular book called All in the End is Harvest, and it's a wonderful book of poetry and prose to do with bereavement, and I actually brought you a copy.
Oh, thank you.
So it's but that helped me. I have given it to other people and it didn't speak to them. They weren't that type of people. So you can't assume it'll help everybody, but there's a certain type of person that the poetry expresses what you actually are trying to express, and then you read it in a poem and you go, oh my God, that is just, that hits the right spot, like Emily Dickinson and all of this, and C.S. Lewis, which is also Surprised by Joy, his description of bereavement. So reading others, and then I did Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, The Stages of Grief. So I kind of educated myself in it.
Yeah, it is. You become drawn to different, maybe articles or books or whatever it is. Something catches your eye, and I think even still after a long time,
you just muddle your way through. But what amazes, grief is like an onion. You keep going around that onion and you hit that bump again. You think you're fine. And I think that's the way it is for life. I'm sorry, it's not like it ever ends. It's not linear.
No, it'll raise its ugly head at some point.
It'll raise its ugly head sometime and trip you up when you're least expecting it. And then you're right back at the beginning and you think, oh, I thought I got over this. But
yeah. How your daughters are grown up now and they've got their own kids. What do you think, without putting words, I suppose, into their mouths, but what would they say to kids now that have lost a parent?
I think they'd find it very challenging.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a person who doesn't find it extremely challenging. Sort of do what I did, is try and capture the photographs, the voice. There's a lot more stuff nowadays. I think they love when there's any old cassette tapes of Neil's voice, or any old DVDs. Like, really hold on to those things, because a child then wants to know, did Daddy love me? Show me where I was loved. Show me the video where he's holding me on his lap.
Or the photos. They always want to see photos.
The photos of Daddy, and they wanted a picture of Daddy in heaven. But the morning after he died, I told them that Daddy had gone to heaven, and I got into the bed with them, I remember, and cuddled up to them and told them. And they said, well, where is heaven? And can we have a ladder and go up there? And then they said, can we have a picture of him in heaven? And funny enough, a friend of a friend drew this charcoal picture of him that they took, and we always had that up on the wall, and we said, that's Daddy in heaven. But you're dealing with such small,
and the innocence as well.
The innocence of it. Yes, the innocence of it. One of the kids said one day, is Daddy a skeleton yet?
Yeah.
They're so lacking in taboo,
filter. Yeah.
in filter. You know, and I sometimes you just had to laugh.
Yeah.
You know, there was always laughter. Even Neil, right up to the end, he had an amazing sense of humour, and he was always, you know, he didn't like to be too straight about things. Like, he wouldn't like to be too serious. He was quieter than me, a lot quieter, a lot more introverted. I'm very extrovert, very out there. But he would just crack a joke.
Yeah.
Rather than give a long response, which I would give, very
Yeah.
long, serious,
Yeah.
you know, intellectual and emotional response, and he would just
Yeah.
make a joke.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
even to the end. So
Yeah. I
I
always think that's
lovely.
lovely to have, because it makes you smile. Martin would have been quite similar, actually. And you
Just
sort
a
of-
joke.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And you'd make a long,
Absolute
you know, an
ridiculous.
essay
Yeah.
about something, and
Yeah.
you just sum it up in a joke.
In just before Neil passed away, you also had a tremendous another grief. You
Two.
lost. I'm going to say that both Chris and Terry,
Yes.
your two babies.
Yes, it was very hard. Maybe it was preparing me, but I don't think the second one was. But the first one, yes, I don't think, despite, you know, the toughness of the north of Ireland and the toughness of going to America and being illegal and coming back and homesick, I think I thought I was very lucky. And no matter what I turned my hand to, it would work out.
Yeah.
Somehow I had that sort of optimistic and invincible. And so I was pregnant on my third child, and I was ecstatic. I was absolutely delighted and thinking, is it a boy or a girl? You know, back then we didn't have the tests.
Yeah.
And making space in my heart and mind and in
Yeah.
our family and in the universe for this person, this being, this baby who I was going to love every bit as I loved every, you know, cell in the baby, in my own babies. You know how we are with babies. You can practically eat them.
Yeah.
We love them so much. So I was making space for this baby, and I was very morning sick. Like, I spent 3 months being really sick and thought, oh God, this is... And then one day I just saw some blood in my underwear. I was really shocked. I was like, that was...
Yeah.
It was kind of a chill. Even now I can feel the chill. And it was like our luck turned. We had been really lucky. There was this feeling of foreboding. So went to the maternity hospital, of course, and the words, there's no heartbeat. I can say it now and without feeling it, but I can describe at the time that I felt like the world had ended. I couldn't describe the grief I felt. It was probably because I was totally unprotected. It was like I was attacked with no guards up. And I was devastated, and the pain I felt. So what happened? I had 2 home deliveries, believe it or not, before that. Roisin and Darina were both born at home. So I had access to a beautiful friend of mine, Maggie, who's a midwife, and she said, let's do this at home. So she took care of me, and we delivered. I describe it in the book, you know, that I was very privileged in a way because I was able to examine the little mite. That's what I called it. And it was 12 weeks, you know, and a fetus. So I was really able to... She allowed me to handle it and look at it. I'm not sure that would have happened in a hospital, but however, and it was quite curious that the spine, it could have been the beginning of any earthling. That's what I say. Maybe not insect, but any mammal or fish. I would really, because I have this, you know, planetary consciousness that we're all connected on this planet and we're all earthlings, and you could see how connected we were. It was going to turn out to be a human, but it hadn't been given enough time. So I was devastated after it. And Neil, I think, found it hard to cope. He had a lot of grief from the north, and I don't think it had really been... A grief hadn't happened to us yet.
Yeah.
So I think he couldn't quite meet me there, and I think he felt inadequate. And he made up for it because it happened a second time. So he was like, okay, we'll carry on. And I did recover, and we looked to the future and put it behind us. And I got pregnant again. Just before he got his diagnosis. And he, as it happened, died in September 93, and I was actually due to give birth to the second baby in October. So had all things gone well, I would have given birth a month after he died. But it wasn't to be, because in a series of disasters, I had the same thing, bleed, sorry, no heartbeat. And this time I was in a hospital and they were very good. They gave us a little plot in the plot of the Angels, which is in Glasnevin Cemetery. It was very surreal, though. I was in a taxi cab with Neil with a little embroidery anglaise coffin on my lap, going to the graveyard in Glasnevin. I remember that. And they had a service in Holles Street and they gave us a bit of counselling, which I hadn't gotten at home. And they were very good. And they offered us a plot in the Angels, and then they put the name on the, and the little thing I was buried, which I didn't get to see this time, obviously, because I was asleep when there was an extraction, So, but that was okay. It was a different experience, and I do remember Neil said to me, because a priest came and he said, I found that more comforting than the home thing with our poetry and all that. And I was like, really? Because, you're such a irreligious. It was a slight change. So that was in May.
So it was almost like he was already starting.
So that was in May. And in June, we went camping with the children. And he said to me, I think I'm getting an ulcer. And I said, oh, Neil, stop. I'm only recovering from this miscarriage. Please. I wasn't very sympathetic. Yeah. And then I said, well, you go to a doctor. And he said, okay. I was really surprised because men never want to go to doctors. No. I was like, what? I'm not going to have to force him. And when he went to the doctor, they thought it was an ulcer. And then he went yellow. Yeah. And all the rest happened then in quick succession. Yeah. So I remember a very tough time for me. 6 weeks after the miscarriage, he was very ill. He was dying. And I had to go to Holles Street for your 6-week checkup. And I think on the table when they were examining me, I was like, I don't know what I was. I was distraught. I think it was too hard for them. I had a meltdown. I couldn't believe that. Is it okay, Tom? I mean, we don't usually talk about grief at this level. Yeah. I have to say this is...
But it's just... my mind is just going there that you're there with this huge grief, knowing...
that I'm facing another one.
You're facing even a bigger one?
Yes. It was too much for the mind. Yeah. So I think people are very vulnerable.
Well, your body shuts down.
Yes, I think nobody should underestimate how vulnerable a person is when they get the shock of a bereavement. It's enough to unhinge you.
Oh, absolutely.
Even the healthiest of people, it's actually enough to shake you to your very core.
Yeah, and I don't think necessarily straight away. I think that can come out in a couple of years when it really hits. I don't...
There's a novelty. There's a novelty effect. Here I am on my own with the kids on my own.
Yeah.
And then the second year, the novelty has worn off.
Yeah.
Nobody warns you.
Nobody warns. That has come up a lot.
Has it?
Yeah, it has. Because I think as well, the first year is such a blur. Like it's like you don't really remember half the things, and everybody's asking to help and whatever. And then the second year, it's more real. It's sort of, you have to do every day. Like you're still being offered help or whatever, but not as much.
I used to be jealous of men because I used to feel that men would have people arriving with apple tarts and casseroles and that fella's great there on his own, and the woman is just expected to get on with it. Well, she should be getting over it now. Yeah. That widow.
What's she thinking?
Because we're expected to be able to just get on with things. And of course, that's very silly of me. Yeah. It's because, of course, everybody suffers. And listen, we're not the first generation.
No.
I'm back in Ancestry.com. I've been doing some of my ancestors. And there were so many people died in childbirth and died this, that and the other, We certainly are not unique.
But no. But you have had a really happy... No, I'm not going to use the word ending because
I have a very happy ending. I say to Richard all the time, "You're my happy ending."
Oh,
to him. And he is,
And this is your husband, Richard.
This is my husband, Richard. So I was able to find love again. And it was sometimes rocky. I had a few relationships along the way. And they ended for various reasons, and those people I still have a lot. I'm not going to mention names, but I still have a lot of love for, including another marriage. And before I met Richard, and then I have met Richard, and we really are suited to each other. It's fantastic. We each have 2 children, and we have 4 grandchildren each. So we have now 8 grandchildren between us, and I'm very blessed. But I do speak about this, but just to go back to the book, is about love, loss, hope and healing is the text, is the subtext of my book. It's the Cornucopia Story, a story of love and loss. But then there's always hope. And as long as there's life, there's hope. So I really speak about hope. You should never give up hope. Emily Dickinson talks about that. Hope is a thing with feathers which perches in the soul, and it's heard everywhere. Hope in the human mind, we do suffer loss, but we also have hope. And what's the house as she puts it? I've heard it in the strangest land and on the chillest sea. The chillest land and the strangest sea. There's never. So I always had hope for the future. And I've always had the ability to love. I think that I got that from my parents. My mother was very loving. And I think, the ability to love is such a gift. And so I was able to go on and build extensions in my heart, as I say in the book, and love again. And rebuild a life again. And it doesn't mean that you're not bereaved, but you build on new parts. And Richard is also widowed, so he has had the same experience of losing his lovely Betty.
And I think that sort of works because then the other person understands.
We understand. And when we first met, I showed him, well, I'm going to be buried in that grave there. That's where my husband Neil is. And he was like, well, I'm going to be buried in that grave.
That's where Betty
is. That sounds so Irish. You won't be buried with my people. But there was something, so we were twinned. And, we've been twinned in a number of ways because our grandchildren were born a week apart in the same hospital, our first grandchildren. Lots of ways that maybe, people up in heaven were working behind the scenes to bring us together.
Deirdre, thank you so much for coming on this week. It's incredible. Like, your story is absolutely incredible, and there's so much more to it in the book as well.
Thank you so much, Venetia. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Grief Pod with Venetia Quick. You can listen on SoundCloud or wherever you get your podcasts. We also have an online community on Facebook, The Grief Pod, or on Instagram @Grief Pod Series.